We now come to session 7, which is promoting sustainable development and management, a multi-stakeholder approach. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Enrique Bolanos, our speaker for this session. He is the president of INCAE Business School. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to talk about what we at INCAE consider is the concept of sustainable development, the role we play as a school outside of the traditional academic initiatives that we take. I'll start first addressing our mission, because our mission really has a lot to do with what I want to talk to you about today. There's a picture there of all of the presidents of Central America in 1963 with President Kennedy. That's when the initial creation of INCAE happened. That's when the decision was made to create a school, and the objective of the school was to help develop the region as the region was going into common market and further economic development. 60 years later, we're still talking about common market, but at least the school was created then. Our first graduating class was in 1969, but the mission here is sustainable development of the countries we serve. That is the mission that we were created to pursue. Contribute to sustainable development of the countries we serve. Clearly is to transformational education. Clearly education is at the core of that, but it is greater and bigger than education. And that's where points 2 and 3 says integrative thinking, innovation capacities with respect to economic, social, and political phenomena in the region, and also promoting dialogue and cooperation among different individuals in the region. And with that as a background, basically our purpose, as we can describe, is to transform lives in Latin America for a better future. And it's lives in Latin America. It's not GDP in Latin America. It's a better future for Latin Americans. And that's important related to our mission. Therefore, if you look at how we operate, we basically have 3 big centers. One is the master programs, the MBA. The other one is all of the executive education, which includes lifelong learning and includes also helping and creating impact. We do create impact through those 2 mechanisms. But we also have impact centers, and we basically have 3 centers. One is CLAGS, the other one is CELIS, and the other one is LEIS. 2 of them are in Spanish, 1 in English, I don't know why. But CLAGS is Centro Latinoamericano for Competitiveness and Sustainable Development. That is the holding, let's say, under which we operate. CELIS is for inclusion and equity, like we had the talk earlier today, and LEIS is entrepreneurship, Latin America Center for Entrepreneurship. So we have those 3 different centers under which we operate. Talking more specifically about the Impact Center, we view the world basically in 4 big components. What we're about is to try to generate economic development. In order to generate the economic development, we need governance, we need rule of law. So we have to get involved and engaged in what the rule of law is in the countries we operate. That has to be done with protection of the environment, even more important today. And all of that is to ultimately achieve what we define as social progress, which is basically the well-being of the population. We have to do those 3 other things to achieve the well-being of the population, which is our ultimate goal and is how we measure impact. Economic development by itself is not enough. It's got to be for the purpose of everybody in the region having a future and having a better life for themselves than what we had before. Just to highlight some of the key milestones, clearly we started in, I showed you the mission statement in 1963. We created, the school was incorporated in 1964. Our first MBA program happened in 1967. Our first graduating class in 1969, and then we were located at that time in Nicaragua, and then the earthquake destroyed the capital of Managua. And so that was our first inroads into impact. We We at that time did not have local faculty. Our faculty was mostly foreigners, mostly from the US, mostly Harvard, because we were created by Harvard. So our faculty went to the government and said, let us help you with an economic development plan to help you reconstruct the city and how the country can come out of the crisis it had. And that's when we started, and we realized that we had there a mission greater than what we had initially had when we started teaching the MBA program. Some of the things we've done, I mean, those of you might not remember, but in the 80s, Central America was in war. Nicaragua had a revolution, El Salvador had a revolution, Guatemala too. All the peace talks were held in our campus, and we summoned and were able to convince the presidents to come and have dialogue with us there. We created we're a partner now for the World Economic Forum. We created the Agenda for Central America Competitiveness and Sustainable Development since 1999. We helped the Panama Canal when they became independent from the Americans. We really trained their people and helped them in the strategy to have a separate agenda than being part of the central government. They could be run independently, efficiently, with good management, and that is what has given them significant success, and that is what gives Panama today part of the important GDP that it has. When Central American Free Trade Agreement happened, we were at the center helping the countries negotiate for a better overall economic development for the countries. When President Obama visited Costa Rica, well, we set the agenda, he visited, and we were the people that got involved in having the meeting with him, and so on and so on. You know, just a few examples of things that we've tried to do outside of what is the traditional education that we have for our students. One of the things we did recently is the COVID-19 emergency. We shut down in March, and therefore we dedicated our faculty completely to help our countries come out of it. So first is, what are the protocols for health authorities in the region? We help them establish the protocols to protect the safety and the well-being of the population in general. Then eventually we developed the methodology for how they would open the corporations and the companies again so that they could have economic activities and protect the population. We had different multi-sectoral forces in Costa Rica, Nicaragua. We talked with the governments all in Central America, Ecuador also. And significant amount of materials, webinars, and whatever, helping our business community and our stakeholders in general to how to face that crisis. This was the most recent, let's say, of the immediate type of initiatives that we took over. As we look forward, really, you know, with the fourth revolution, we see that there's two things coming. Climate change, so we have to be involved in climate change to help shape the dialogue of climate change in our region, and we also have to be involved with what we call social progress, because this is an example of many of the communities, and this could be applied to any of the countries in which all of us are here. And as long as we don't have a better social progress for the vast majority of the population, we have work to do. And we as academia believe as academians in the region that it is our responsibility to at least address this dialogue and talk about it and raise it in the major decision makers in the countries. From an outreach perspective, looking from our impact center, not from an academic initiative, but looking at this from an impact center, we're very much involved in what we call the SPI, the Social Progress Index. You probably can't read it there. There's 3 columns of 3 basic elements of the Social Progress Index. I'll read them to you in a high level. One is what we call, the first column to the left is what we call basic human rights. The question is, do I, a citizen of any country, have nutrition? Do I have shelter? Do I have water? Do I have personal safety? The second column is foundations of wellness. Do I have access to basic knowledge? Do I have access to information? Do I have environmental quality? And the third column is opportunities. Do I have personal rights? Is there inclusion? Is there advanced education for me as an individual there? And what this measures really is the output. It does not measure the input. So the objective of this index is, can we transform economic growth into social progress? Or said differently, can we transform economic growth into well-being of the population? And what we try to do with this is change the dialogue and not have the dialogue, let's have a GDP growth greater than X. The dialogue is, let's have a GDP growth greater than X in order to have well-being for the population. This SPI initiative, these are the partners, and we are partners of that initiative from an academia standpoint, and we have been involved from the beginning in it. And one of our former rectors is in the board of directors of the SPI initiative. And basically what it measures is, it measures all of those indicators that I presented to you as output, as results. And because you measure it as an output, then you can take actionable initiatives to it. Say, well, I want to address this problem or that problem. If you look at there, those are the Latin American countries. And I don't know, maybe you might not be able to see it. There's 5 tiers, tier 1 through 5. The best country we have in Latin America is Chile, with each tier 2. We have in tier 2, Chile, Costa Rica, Uruguay, and that's it. Tier 2, not 1. Chile is number 37 worldwide. That means there are 36 countries better than our best country. And if you look further down, you have El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala, tier 4 and 5. There's 168 countries that we measure here. Guatemala is number 112 and number 113. Guatemala has an index of 59, Chile has an index of 82. But you all know what happened to Chile, the social unrest that Chile had. Let me give you this example. Chile is ranked 37th. In sanitation, it's ranked 79th. In water source, 77. Housing affordability, 149th out of 168 countries. In equal access to higher education, 114th. So although Chile has a 37 number, which is great, wonderful, you look at what happened, but you look at further down, you look at these indicators, and you can understand why what happened happened. And therefore, if you look at this, you can say, well, how do I address sanitation? So you go to the whatever community you need to where the sanitation is down and you address it. This is a tool for us to really work on improving the well-being of the population. There is a correlation. The correlation is clearly linked with higher income. If you generate higher income, you are having more resources to invest more in the population. But look at Panama. Panama has the highest income of all of the countries in Latin America. And look at their SPI. That means Panama does a bad job vis-a-vis other countries in bringing that wealth to its population. Look at Costa Rica, has a decent income, but it has a much better SPI than what it has relatively to its income. Therefore, you need to grow the income, and that's why one of our first initiatives is economic development. But once you grow the income, you need to use the resources the best way possible to bring well-being to the overall population. And there you see that Costa Rica does a much better job than Panama, and Mexico, which is richer than many of the countries, does not do that good of a job. And it's basically tools for us to do a better job. This is one of the initiatives in which we're being engaged now. I shared with you some of the prior things we've done, and we try to do initiatives in each of the sectors, in economic development, in social progress, and in governance, and in environmental. But this is the one that will link economic development with social progress. This is an example. I have some examples, but I'll just go through them very quickly. Costa Rica is a great tourist place. Well, they developed their strategy, it's ecotourism, and they have done a very good job developing their tourist strategy in the country since the 80s and 90s. We helped them develop that strategy back then. Now that they have a very solid strategy, we're helping them change the dialogue and look at the areas where tourists go and see what the well-being of the population is in those areas. And therefore now what we're telling the municipalities in each of those regions is, how can you have a strategy where you can also incorporate the well-being of your people? And so they go in, we do a survey, we find what the weaknesses are based on what I suggested here, which are the indicators that we have in this column here, in these 3 columns, and then they take actionable initiatives to try to improve the well-being of the population. They're trying to pursue a win-win strategy. And they have a goal of saying, we're going to have an average number of 70 in these communities by such and such a date. It's just an example of initiatives that we help, in this case, Costa Rica, which Costa Rica today is very open to it, and therefore it's easy to work with them because they want to do that. Some of our countries in the Northern Triangle are not as open-minded, let's say, to do it, so it's more difficult for us to achieve that, but you try to work with whatever it is that you can. This is another one, sustainable supply chain strategies. IDB worked with us in here. IDB was trying to develop the overall supply chain of the cocoa growth in the case of Nicaragua with Ecom Trading Company that they grow and buy a lot of the cocoa there. So we got involved, and part of the supply strategy was not only improve the yields and the productivity of the plantations, but improve the lifestyle and the quality of life of the students. And then they brought in experts to talk about housing, to talk about education. We measured what the initial point was in 2017 when we initiated this, and then we measured outcomes by 2021, and we saw the progress and the improvement that they were doing. Based on that, they now have taken that to other parts of the world, to other regions, to try to pursue similar strategies. This is one strategy where in Nicaragua, very low-income people we try to help. The strategy of the tourism in Costa Rica is a strategy in which also we try to help at a different level, at a different type of initiative. This is just a couple of examples of what we've done in social progress. Again, what we try to do is tell the stakeholders, let's measure well-being of the population, not necessarily GDP of the country. We're also doing initiatives in climate change. Climate change has to be part of what we have to get involved because climate change is upon us now. It's critical, and especially in our countries. The Isthmus of Central America has been highly impacted. There's tremendous negative consequences because of that, and we're trying to do initiatives in that. We have a couple of them. One is what we call Articulac, in which we combine a lot of the corporations in the region, and we have them with NGOs and with government, have a common practice to see how they can address the issues. And the other one is a climate governance initiative that we did in this specific sector. It's the Central American countries to promote dialogue in climate change in the board of directors of the different corporations in the countries. And we did this with the World Economic Forum's Climate Principles platform, and they are helping us and guiding us and supporting us in this initiative. We don't do this by ourselves. The SPI, we did it with partners. This, we're doing it with partners. We partner with the IDB. We partner with multinationals. There is an initiative that we had, small, medium enterprises in Central America. We did with MasterCard. They financed it, Cargill and PriceSmart. The three of them financed that initiative. We don't have the resources to do it, so the objectives, the objective of getting resources is a challenge. We work with whoever we can, and we try to convince partners of the value of doing this for the improvement of the region in general. We also, in the case of governance, we went to the Northern Triangle, where we have significant problems with the corruption perception. We got AID to finance this initiative, and we created a national anti-corruption agenda in the Northern Triangle. We did this in Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. And the objective of this is to raise the concept of corruption in the eyes of the different stakeholders. So we got together different people, NGOs, corporations, government employees, and they had conversations, multi-sectoral conversations, guided by a professor at INCAE, guiding the conversation to see what it would take to change corruption, or what are the key topics that are impacting corruption in the region. At the beginning, conversations were very difficult. Everybody pointed fingers on everybody. The corporation felt that they were being threatened by NGOs. NGOs were accusing the corporations of being guilty ones in this type of cancer that we have in our countries. But we got them to bring their barriers down, we got them to talk, and these are some of the recommendations that they came up with together as members of the community of the key stakeholders in a given country. I'm not going to go through them, but it's just an example of what it is that we're doing now in the case of anti-corruption. Another initiative that I didn't put here, we're helping the 3 countries in the Northern Triangle with procurement, better procurement practices, so that they can have procurement from the public sector better managed so that we can avoid corruption. In the case of Guatemala and in the case of El Salvador, the countries, the central governments refused to participate. Honduras did participate. Then we went to the municipalities and we got a lot of the municipalities participating, and we're trying to instill best practices in them as they go in with this type of initiatives. So basically, in a nutshell, I mean, from an outreach perspective, we embark and we go into initiatives that are broader than simply academic. Clearly, in academic, we have a concentration in sustainability. There's no question about that, and a significant percentage of our students take a degree in sustainability. We have a lot of cases that we've written about sustainability. We have simulations. We have, you know, we work with different international organizations. We have MCPs, what we call management consulting practice, where each student has to take an MCP before they graduate, and a lot of them do projects on sustainability. We have clubs, Sustainability Week. And in the impact centers, we clearly have that one that I described to you, CLAGS, but we have the chair of the Viva Ideas, Mishhaini. We have the chair of the Harry Strachan Social Philanthropy, and we have the chair of René Morales in the case of entrepreneurship. So we're trying to pursue all of these concepts of initiatives in our academic programs, and we have dialogue with the students, and we get the students involved in the initiatives we take in our impact centers. But it's really create a mindset of having to change the dialogue of how we operate, and it's not only go out to the business community and make money and forget about whatever is happening to us. This is a seminar, a simulation in which we have the participants in the simulation become, let's say, presidents of the country in a given day, and therefore, with this simulation, they have the different levels that they can manage to try to improve economic growth, to try to improve environmental, and try to improve social progress. And depending how they manage the resources that they have, they come out with a final output, and they see if they did a good job or if they did a bad job, or they understand the realities of what has transpired. This was designed by one of our professors, and we use it a lot in classes, especially when we bring outside people.
Social and environmental areas. How can you balance these 3 dimensions and achieve a successful country?
You can hear, right?
Traditionally, GDP has helped us measure a country's success based on economic growth. But economic growth does not always translate into well-being. The Social Progress Index is a new measure that allows you to add social and environmental aspects to the equation, showing a reality that can be very different. The real challenge for a prosperous country is to have a high GDP and an excellent performance on all dimensions of the Social Progress Index. We created a simulation tool that will allow you to learn by doing. With this simulator, you will take on the role of president of your country, considering trade-offs and making long-term decisions. For example, building more factories will increase production, but will decrease your forests. Investing in schools and universities will decrease criminal activity, but it will take several years to see the results and will cost you money that you might not currently have. In the end, the winner will be the one who achieves economic growth and high social progress. Are you up to the challenge? Contact us if you want to run a country.
It's an example of the simulation we teach. And we also participate in the positive impact ratings from Switzerland, and we were ranked as a transforming school because of it's immersed, let's say, in our DNA, in our way of doing business. We really try to, I'm finishing now, we really try to summarize. What we try to do is, sometimes I talk to my colleagues, first of all, let me say this, we were created by the business community. We have a board of directors that is formed of business leaders of the region, and we have also national committees in each of the countries in which is formed by business leaders. So we owe ourselves to the business community. We're here to generate an MBA program, education, to grow the economic development of the countries. But as we talk to those business leaders, we really try to impact their thinking and change their mindset. And a lot of my friends, the key business leaders in some of our countries, not all of them, they have difficulty accepting SPI. They see this as, or they have difficulty accepting the climate change. They have difficulty accepting governance. Some people think that corruption is a way of life and you have to learn to live with that. And it's hard to convince them contrary to do other things. And what we're trying to tell them is, can your son or daughter live here next generation? Is Guatemala safe enough for you? Is El Salvador safe enough for your kids? Is Honduras safe enough for your kids? We don't have those problems in Costa Rica and Panama, but we do have them in the 4 countries of the Northern Triangle. And the question is, should we do things differently? For 200 years we've tried, and these are the results that we have as a region. If you look at a region in the 1980s, a region was a lost decade because we didn't grow at all. I think we're now getting into another decade of lost growth also because we're not growing. I read the other day that Brazil is very happy because they're now going to grow 1.7% this year, which is really unacceptable. With the population we have, in Central America, for example, the big economic growth we have is migration. We send people abroad and they send remittances to the region. I think 25% of El Salvador's GDP is based on remittances. I mean, we're mortgaging our future. We have no real future people in our countries because they're all migrating. And there's, as you know, corruption, there's criminality, and there's really things that need to happen, that need to improve. And we as leaders, academia leaders, need to change the dialogue and change the landscape of how we operate so that our business communities can also have future in their respective regions. We have a saying that says you cannot have successful companies in failed countries, So that is part of the message that we try to transmit to our CEOs, our colleagues, our stakeholders, and we try to operate with whoever stakeholder we can and try to get resources from whoever is willing to give us the resources. But it's really ingrained in our DNA, and that's what we're about trying to do, besides what we do, obviously, in the academic excellence and all of the other initiatives that you're familiar with. So that's it, and thank you very much. Perhaps I would say this we have, we were linked, not anymore, to Harvard. When we created CLAGS, we brought Michael Porter in as our, let's say, advisor. And what he says is true. For me, the purpose of a business school is more than management training. It should strengthen society. This is what makes INCAE unique. It is able to have an influence way beyond its size. And in 2019, we had our 50th anniversary of our MBA class. And because we were created initially by Harvard, I invited the Dean of Harvard Business School to be the keynote speaker. And his comment was, INCAE has been an engine of economic development and leadership in the region. Development integral, not necessarily GDP. In many ways, INCAE has become a school with a greater impact for the Latin America region, meaning more the Central America region, than Harvard has been in the US. And that's what we're trying to do, more than a management training school, really strengthen society so we can all have a wellness for the population, our people that deserve it. Thank you again. Right on time, so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. I have more questions than answers, but I'll do the best I can. Yes, please.
So I've been grappling with what I find is a challenge as new dean at Uninorte, and it's the funding from third parties, and how did you manage with them, or did you encounter the problem that when you receive funding from a third party, the third party wants the result to only be owned by them and not to become a public good? So were you able to work out receiving the data, getting the information, and then sharing the experiences, like what you're saying about the cocoa industry, that you were able to share the experience worldwide? Was that
It varies from donor to donor. It's not an easy task. Ideally, in an ideal world, I mean, I would love to have all the resources so that I could do what I need to do and forget about the donors, but that doesn't happen. You know, we're a standalone graduate school. We don't have unlimited resources. We need to fund this with outside resources. What we do is, I guess the last 40 years that we've been operating, we've created that brand of a sustainable development type of school, let's say. And once you create the brand, it makes it easier for us to try to aspire to that. But each donor has their own agenda. And therefore, your challenge is how do you migrate, how do you make their agenda with your agenda work together? For example, now, the United States government is very concerned with migration from the Northern Triangle. So they want to invest in the Northern Triangle. So there we said, well, we have an opportunity. Let's go to them and tell them, we are the people who know the ground, who know the territory. Let us work together in doing this initiative. So the initiative of anti-corruption came from that, us convincing them to do that. MasterCard is a company that pushes significant women's growth and diversity. Well, we have an initiative for women's training. We talked to MasterCard, and then once MasterCard got on board, we convinced PriceSmart and convinced Cargill, and we created a regional initiative that probably helped us because it's the Northern Triangle, and again, we convinced them to avoid migration to the US. We work with IDB. We have several stakeholders that are donors like those chairs that we have. But it's a challenge. It's always a challenge to get them. We work with German governments, European Union, because they also want to support environmental jobs. So with them, we pursue that. So we have different initiatives with different donors depending on what their interest is. And by and large, we haven't had any problem in sharing the information. They've been open about that. In fact, they like it because they get credit for what is being done. That has not been an issue for us. Okay, if no further questions, thank you very much for your time.